So, Kate, what have we got on the show today?
Robert, today we have a turning point in world history, the first of our three-parter into the American War of Independence. It is the birth of a nation.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Queens, Kings, and Dastardly Things, the podcast that looks at all the great events in history, but through a pretty shameless royal lens, it has to be said. I'm Robert Hardman, Daily Mail columnist and royal biographer. I'm joined, as ever, by my colleague, Professor Kate Williams, royal historian, royal biographer. Kate, hello.
Hello, Robert.
And what have we got coming up today?
Robert, we have got part one of our deep dive into the American War of Independence.
So we are going to look at how George III went from being the King of America, and he was King of America, to being the demonized tyrant and leading to what I think many of us would call the greatest divorce in history.
And didn't President Obama say, Robert, that this was just a blip in the special relationship?
Yeah. In his 2011 state visit to Britain, and he was at Buckingham Palace with the late Queen Elizabeth II, and he just arrived, and they just had lunch, and she took him through into the picture gallery at the palace, and there was laid out, as happens with state visitors, the monarch gets out the sort of the best memorabilia for whichever country it is, and obviously in the case of the United States, there's some great memorabilia, and she's showing him these various documents and souvenirs, if you like, of the American War of Independence. And there is George III's essay, famous essay, and we'll come on to that in a bit. And in big letters it says, "America is lost!" And Obama sees this and he goes, "Oh, just a temporary blip in the relationship." So, Kate, let's go back to the start, because it wasn't always a case of wicked, naughty, evil, bad King George III. I mean, he was actually at one point rather loved by his American citizens, and not that they even saw themselves as American, did they?
No. So what we might ask is, what are British people doing so far away in America in the first place? And it's actually very interesting, isn't it? Because it was the Vikings who first, we believe, encountered the mass of land that we now know as the United States. So they were avid sailors. But by the 16th century, it is the race for empires between the European powers. We've got Spain, we've got France, we've got Portugal, who are colonizing parts of the Americas. And there is the first attempt at making a English colony by Sir Walter Raleigh in Roanoke. And this is the first attempt, and the first one fails. And the second one, well, it's actually quite a mystery, because I think there's about 120 colonists who go over, and they all disappear. I mean, do they die? Are they assimilated into the local Native American population? We don't exactly know what happened to them. So we have this failed colony during the Elizabethan period, and then in 1607 comes Jamestown, and this is under the name of James I. A group of colonists arrive to really pitch their camp there. And this colony actually succeeds. And one reason is because local Native American tribes apparently don't want the land. It's very swampy. It's very poor. They think, who on earth would want to live there? And initially, the Jamestown colonists have quite a good relationship with the Native American tribes. Initially, there's trade, there's interaction. But then, as we know, it doesn't stay this way. There's fighting, there's disease. But who are these people who come over on this huge journey that they might very well die on, and come over to this impossible place known as America? Who are these? When everyone else is trundling around Jacobean London and thinking, oh my goodness, maybe I'll think about some Shakespeare plays, or oh dear, what happened about Guy Fawkes? You've got these people who get on a ship and head over. Now, it's really interesting about who chose to come. So you have a lot of the men who go out there are adventurers. A lot of the men who go out there are really what we call prospectors. They're early adopters. They're going out there for land. And sometimes, I don't know, is it going too far to compare them to people now who say they might go and live on Mars? Because I don't know if this is too crazy, but you're going to get on this ship, well, it's a spaceship, you're going to get on this ship and go off to this place that you probably will never be able to come back from. You may die on the journey. You don't really know what it's going to be like when you're there, and yet you're going to do it because the prospect of what you might have if you make a success of your life is so entrancing.
Or you're powered by very strong beliefs that are in some way prescribed.
So yeah, 1620, you have the Mayflower, the famous Mayflower, go over, and they land just near Cape Cod, and I think they've got 120 passengers, 30 crew, and they feel that they can't worship in the way they wish in the Stuart world, and they want to create really a new world, a new spiritual, right world of excellence and perfection.
We are talking very, very rudimentary initial settlements. And yet, by the time we get to what we're talking about today, the War of Independence, we're in the mid-18th century. America it's a big, prosperous, vast area.
Well, we have 13 colonies by this point. We have about 2.5 million people living in the colonies, and that population doubles roughly at a rate of every 25 years because of a high birth rate and immigration. You have a lot of young people going over, and when they go over, they have a lot of children, and immigration, because word gets back to the old country that this is where you can make money. And what they do have in particular, unlike back in England or Scotland or Wales or Ireland, is that they are property owners. And this also means that this rather lacking in an aristocratic hierarchy in a society, it also means that when you have land, you have a say. So all of these men, these white men, are used to having quite a big say in what these develop to be these sort of little parliaments that they have in the 13 colonies. So they are used to owning properties, they're used to having a say, and they're used to being independent, and also religiously independent. Even the ones who aren't strictly Puritans, the churches in the colonies are not churches with a network of bishops and a network of hierarchy above them. They pretty much, live according to their own rules.
So, Kate, here we are in the second half of the 18th century, 1760. A young King George III comes to the throne. His father has died young. He's inherited from his grandfather, George II. And in fairly short order, the what's known as the 7 Years' War comes to an end. This long-running, almost world war between England and France. And at this point, the colonies in America are pretty loyal, aren't they? They see George III as essentially a king who's there to protect them, and things are relatively content. And then gradually, from London come a series of instructions, rules, laws that make those colonists start to question their Englishness, their Britishness. There are all these taxes being imposed on these people.
In the aftermath of the Franco-Indian War in 1763, the government is really thinking, okay, we have protected the colonists, we spent a lot of money, and we need to get this back. First of all, they demand to station a rather large amount of officers there, and that's really a way of paying these aristocratic officers, still making sure they get some money. And the colonists say, we don't want these officers there. That's not fair. And also they impose the stamp tax of 1765, which is a tax on really printed materials, and it's from everything from newspapers to playing cards. And after this, we start to see more taxes. And there's a tax on tea, there's a tax on paper, there's a tax on glass.
And yet they don't have a voice in Parliament, do they?
And Parliament says, we represent all of you. We're one big sort of great big dream overlord Parliament. But the colonists, who have their own little parliaments, are increasingly saying, we should govern ourselves. And hey, George III, what do you do for us? You just ask for money, you send soldiers here. Why should we give it?
Although there is at this time, of course, there's that sense that the monarch is the good guy who's somehow on your side, and it's these grasping politicians behind all this. Yeah, I mean, this is a time when they are actually erecting statues of George III rather than pulling them down. And so, Kate, the simmering resentment that is rising all the time, it's originally driven by tax, by duties, by a sense of a rapacious absentee landlord. It then comes to a head in 1770, doesn't it, in Boston?
And what happens in March 1770 is what becomes known as the Boston Massacre. There are soldiers in town, and some of the crowd are throwing snowballs and stones at them, and the soldiers panic and fire into the crowd, and they hit 11 people, and 5 are killed. This is so shocking because these soldiers are supposed to be there to protect them, look after them. That's been the justification from the British government. And here they are killing people. And what you have forming is the Sons of Liberty, an underground movement of men, young men, and what they want is total reform of the relationship between Parliament and the colonies. I mean, I wouldn't exactly say they're out asking for independence at this point, but they want total reform and much more of their own self-direction.
The resentment grows, doesn't it? And
they think we're just a piggy bank for you. You're just using us as a piggy bank and trying to get money out of us, and with all these taxes. And the taxes are revoked when everyone threatens to boycott the British goods. But still, one tax remains, and that's the tea tax. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, that you wouldn't think people are drinking an awful lot of tea. People do love tea. They love tea.
Americans haven't gone into coffee.
We haven't quite got a Starbucks on every 18th century corner, and there's still a tax on tea. And then the British government says what they're going to do is to allow the East India Company, this very powerful trading company which has been taking tea and trading it and will be the dominant sort of imperial empire oppressive force in India, saying that they'll let them send over their tea to the colonies and they can sell it much cheaper and it's really untaxed. And this really upsets the colonists because they've got their own tea shops and it seems like it's totally undermining their rights. You wouldn't think that, an argument over who gets a cheaper tea bag is that upsetting, but it is very symbolic of who is in charge here. And the word goes out on the network of don't let these ships in, don't let them dock. A group from the Sons of Liberty, 16 men, they dress in Native American dress and they board these ships and they throw the tea into the harbour. And this is a lot of tea, estimated at about £10,000 at the time. This is saying to really the British government, this is an act of trade war.
It's fascinating, isn't it, Kate, that it's only 3 years on from a massacre, and yet what has become the totemic issue is not the murder of 5 innocent civilians, but it's the defenestration of 46 tons of tea. And it becomes a sort of rallying point for the rebel cause. So it doesn't, by the way, no one at the time is calling it the Boston Tea Party.
No, it's not fun at all. It's not no fun at all.
The phrase, I think, doesn't actually come into common usage for about another 50 years when it starts to be applied by sort of historians. At the time, it's an act of tea-based sabotage.
It's tea-based sabotage. And this is the moment for the British government really to say, well, we see there are resentments, we see there's anger, and let's have a negotiation. Instead, what they do is they put down these really punitive acts. They pretty much say Massachusetts has lost its constitution, it can't self-govern anymore, and they bring in these acts that are extremely unpopular.
The
coercive acts. And one of them is that you could have a soldier put in your house without permission, quartered at your house. The idea is that we're going to show the colonists who's boss. Instead, of course, what you see is the absolute surging of anger about this, and what you see now are the rebels beginning to gather arms.
Well, Kate, we have come through the uprising, effectively, in Boston. Starts with the Boston Massacre in 1770. Tensions grow and grow. There's the Boston Tea Party, as nobody calls it at the time, in 1773, when the Sons of Liberty chuck what is an enormously valuable amount of tea into Boston Harbour. But that really sets things in motion. Fast forward to 1775, and this goes from a skirmish, a tussle, rows, arguments. It becomes a proper war of independence when shots are fired between two forces, really. And that comes in 1775 at Concord and Lexington, doesn't it? That's when forces start to come into open conflict with the local militias, culminating in a fully fledged battle, the Battle of Bunker Hill, which nominally British forces win. It's a pretty Pyrrhic victory. I think half the British troops are killed or wounded.
It is George III's response in mid-1775 to the Battle of Bunker Hill that the colonies are in rebellion. And as you say, this is really the official beginning of the war from the English point of view. And this proclamation of rebellion, I imagine if you're a citizen in the mid-18th century reading about this in the newspaper in your coffee house, you think, oh, well, that's not going to last long. You know, those colonists, we're going to beat them because our army is all powerful. And this is the question, isn't it, about the American War of Independence? How does this rather raggle-taggle army with not much money from only 13 colonies manage to beat down the British army, who are all powerful and they see themselves as this great army? How do they succeed? And I, it's an interesting question. I think there are, perhaps I might argue, there are three particular ways in which we can say this is why the Americans have an advantage that the British don't realise. So firstly, they know the terrain. They know the terrain. They can also conduct guerrilla warfare. It's their country. And secondly, they have a lot of men who are really very experienced in war due to the ongoing wars we've had within the whole area. And thirdly, the British are a long way away. They're a long way away.
Supply lines.
The supply lines.
Very, very challenging.
Exactly. The supply lines are miles away.
I think that's really what lies at the heart of all the all this gathering storm is this gap that by the time you've got a letter from a governor on the eastern seaboard of what we would now call the USA, by the time that letter's gone all the way across, reached London, where it's the government, the Admiralty, the King have had a look at it, made a decision and sent it back, you're talking months, and things can change in that time. So, I mean, communications play a huge part.
And how do you supply this massive army without taking or buying food from the colonists? And we often see this in the history of war. It is very hard to win a war on their turf.
Although we have to remember at this point, Gates, it's not as simple, I think, as to view this as a sort of army of occupation imposing its will, because there are a lot of loyalists. I mean, there is. It's often said that the American War of Independence is not sort of Britain v. America. There's a sort of civil war dimension to it, because there are a lot of loyalists fighting with the British, and then of course throughout it all is this often overlooked but incredibly important element, which is 500,000 enslaved Africans who really owe no allegiance to either side, who have been brought there entirely by coercion, and who never sort of really seem to have any say in anything.
And the British do offer them freedom if they fight.
Yeah, by the end of 1775, things have got to the point that Lord Dunmore, one of the British commanders, says, "Well, you fight for us, you will have your freedom," and so that does start to change the dynamic. But Kate, while Bunker Hill is nominally a victory for the British, at great loss, and let's remember again that they are a very long way from home, what it also does is it galvanizes George Washington into creating a proper standing army. He's worked out that militias are not going to win this war. We've got to have a proper army. And so by the time we get to 1776, it really is George Washington's army against George III's army. And things are going this way and that. And you get to the summer of 1776. And I think it's an extraordinary period in history that we don't always get our heads around. Because on the one hand, you've got the Brits having this big win against George Washington in New York. New York is fallen to the Brits, but at the same time, there's something really fundamental going on in Philadelphia, isn't there?
On July the 4th, 1776, the moment occurs that we are celebrating this year with 250 years of American independence. The Declaration of Independence is signed, and this is the master document. This is the document of American independence. And it's
the birth of the United States, isn't it? It's the first time the words United States are in a sort of formal document.
Formal document is on view in the National Archives in Washington, and there is no going back from this moment. This great moment that has so much wonderful language, that all men are created equal, that the Creator has endowed with them certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, that life, liberty,
Poetry.
and the pursuit of happiness. It's poetry. And what it must have been like to make this document. And this really is the point of no return. I mean, this is treason. This is treason by the king's standards, by parliamentary standards. You cannot go back. They have said, we want independence. We're no longer thinking that maybe we could reform our situation, that maybe if you're just a bit nicer to us, we can have some negotiations, put some representatives in parliament. It is now saying it is independence or bust. And the electricity there must have been in that room signing that document when they were really thinking, we'll have to fight for our lives for this. Either we live or die for independence. And it's just such a great historical moment.
So you've had the proclamation of rebellion by George III on one side of the Atlantic, and instead of a sort of cowering, timid white flag on the other side, you now have the Declaration of Independence. But I think with hindsight, we always sort of slightly think, and that's it, folks. And then the USA comes into force and off we all go. But of course, it does at the time.
The British weren't giving up that easily.
George Washington is even there. George Washington is fighting the British elsewhere. He doesn't even put his name on this document. There wasn't much time for celebration because George III, when he got the news, he didn't feel in any way that he'd lost the colonies. He just thought, right, well, okay, on we go. We've got to teach them a lesson.
From the fall of 1776, the British think they are winning. And by the end of the year, really, American morale is very low. New York has been taken. British are in control of New York. And actually, George Washington writes and says, I think the game is up. I think the game is pretty near up. Men are deserting. They think the cause of independence is pointless. They're all saying, oh, no, yes, well, maybe let's just go back and get on with things because we want to carry on with our trading nation. But then we have, at the end of the year, in pretty brutal conditions, it is winter in America, we have the Battle of Trenton in New Jersey. And this battle is really a huge win for Washington's forces. They managed to push the British back 2/3 of the opposing force, the Hessian force, they are known as. They are mainly German fighters. 2/3 of the opposing force are captured. Very few Americans are lost. I mean, this is a triumph. And really, for everyone watching, everyone thinking, all of the Americans, this is finally a suggestion that they can beat the British, because up till then, it's been looking pretty dicey.
And then the following year, we get to the Battle of Saratoga. A year later, you've got France finally feeling, okay, the Brits, they're losing this one. We're going to openly join in.
Because France has a lot of possessions in the States as well. Louisiana is named after King Louis. And they're sort of intervening in the American war on the American side because really they want the British out. You know, it's often said, we've talked about this in one of our other podcasts, haven't we, how Marie Antoinette is blamed for this massive debt balloon that France has. But it's not Marie Antoinette's hairstyles that creates this debt balloon. It's the American War of Revolution. And this is this huge cost. So France comes in and Britain's in real trouble.
Particularly when the French fleet starts to get involved.
British naval power has always been its sort of source of strength. The Americans don't have a navy, but the French do. And therefore, this is some way that they can really battle back against the British, who are still controlling trade routes.
And you've got, by 1781, the Brits are pretty much hemmed in Yorktown, and the British fleet wants to come and help them. And there's the French Navy getting in the way. And although out at sea, it's not really much of a naval battle, it stops British supplies reaching Cornwallis and his troops at Yorktown. And that's kind of it, really. I mean, the Brits have been, we've glossed over all the fighting going on further to the south, but it comes to a head there in Yorktown. And I think what's so interesting there, looking at it from a royal perspective, is it's so clearly game over for the Brits at this point. And yet George doesn't see it that way. George is still thinking, well, okay, that didn't work out too well, but we're going to carry on. And you're gradually getting this realization back in Britain among politicians that we've just got to stop this war. We've just got to, move on, let this new country take shape and get on with it.
And these wins are humiliating for the British, because what you're told at the time, that the British Army, the British Navy is all powerful, you're told that everyone loves George III, that everyone wants to be governed by Parliament. And here is a collection of men, really, who say, we don't want to be governed, and then they fight back. And they're even fighting back in 1770, they fight with snowballs. And now, at this point, they're fighting back, they're winning, and the British have to surrender.
And it's not until, actually, 1783, when we finally get to that document we talked about at the start, that famous essay by George III, "America is lost!" ! And that really is the point at which even George III has decided, okay, this
He's
is
sort of in
gonna work
denial,
out.
isn't it? What's the 7 stages of grief? Is it the first one is denial, and finally you get there in acceptance? I bet everyone's saying, George, they're gone. But I love America, I love it. I mean, those of us who love the musical Hamilton remember the iconic portrayal of George III in Hamilton, who stands there singing, I'm going to send over guns and cannons to remind you of my love. And I think that does really put a finger on how George III felt it.
And the song,
I love
he
you.
says, you'll be back.
You'll be back.
But of course he's wrong. But it has taken, it's remarkable. It's 1776, the Declaration of Independence. It's not until 1783 that George really does wake up, as it were, to smell the coffee, or perhaps the tea in his case. But it's finally then that he concedes, right, it's really over. But what is interesting is if you then read on into that essay below the headline and the exclamation mark, America is lost, he does actually, there's a sort of, it just shows that George, he's no fool. I mean, he actually says, we shall reap more advantages of trade as friends than we did when they were colonists. He's finally reached the point where he thinks, okay, I can't carry on calling this my kingdom. I'm not king of America.
They did kind of win at Yorktown.
Exactly. But you know what? We're going to make this work. And that is where we are going to start our next episode, because coming to join us next time, Kate, we've got someone who I think can speak with extraordinary authority, because she has a vested interest in both camps. But until then, it's a goodbye from me, Robert Hardman.
And for me, Kate Williams, goodbye.